that owns this are Ken and Penny Durant and their son Paul, who acts as kind of the general manager on all sides of this property. The family moved out here in the late 60s. They have family that's been farming out in Yamhill County, so they're considered fifth generation farmers out here. In the early 70s, they were one of the first families to plant Pinot Noir grapes on these hillsides along with Susan Sokol-Blosser. And then this property started as a roadside specialty herb and garden nursery. And this building was built in 1999, and in 2000 it opened. You could come in and buy gardening books and rakes and shovels and things like that, and we've evolved quite a bit since then. So the store started, and Penny was picking up a wholesale nursery order in 2005 and saw that they had olive trees and said, olive trees in Oregon. And she picked up a few, and they did a lot of research in a short amount of time, called UC Davis and got in contact with their olive growing program and got a lot of pointers, and later that year they planted thousands and thousands of olive trees. So that's how this all began. And just several years ago, I think it's just the fourth season too, you know, as you walk the property, we just added the tasting room about 4 years ago, and I think today you might get a beautiful view of Mount Hood, so even if you're not wine tasting, just to walk up, you can see the vineyard down below, and the view is spectacular up on that lawn, so if you have time. But we're part of the Oregon Lavender Association. We have a lavender field down below. Of course, it's off season. We have lodging, and then of course we'll walk up to the mill here. So we planted the olive trees. It is a very unusual crop for Oregon. We really play along the borderline of hardiness with those olives, but it's working. So we'll head up to the mill and get started with that.
Do you know what elevation you are here?
We're right around 400, give or take. Yeah. No, not too high up there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we have till 11:45.
Oh, you've got time.
Yeah.
All right. Plenty of time. So I always like to stop here. This is just a great reminder of the history of olive oil, milling, different cultures throughout the world, and how long we've been doing this. I think when you read Homer's Iliad and Odyssey and, you know, historical books, there's all this trace evidence of milling olives and making oil. So this is an old Spanish mill, and this is, they think, between 200 to 300 years old. This was brought in from Barcelona, Spain, and it was the smallest out of the three. We had a choice of three, and we brought the smallest one in. And these are huge granite slabs, and this would have been, you know, animal powered. There would have been dowels coming out the sides, and this would just turn in a circular motion. They would pour buckets or baskets of olives in, and this would just keep grinding those olives up until it turned into a paste, and then waiting for the oil to separate. And then out the front, there's a little kind of a spout, if you will. If you lift up, the oil would drain out, and there'd be wicker mats, and that oil would go through with some of the paste, and they'd press those mats to extract the oil. So it's a very there's mills that look like this today, and sometimes when you're traveling, you'll see these still. They'll do roadside demonstrations with these old mills. That's pretty neat.
What exposure is this?
This is not southern. This is, oh gosh. I'm trying to remember.
Sorry.
We were just talking about this the other day. So yeah, because the sun is going to go across. So what is that?
East to west?
East to west, yeah. So
North?
it's something odd that you wouldn't normally, you know,
Yeah.
if you're talking about planting grapes and things like that. So this is one of our groves. Altogether we have 17 acres planted. On this hillside is primarily Arbequina, which is a Spanish variety of olive. We grow several other varieties. We grow a Greek variety called Koroniki, several different Italian varieties, and we're also working with some French varieties, and those are experimental. We're not milling any of those olives yet. And there are, out of 1,000 different varieties of olives, there's only going to be, a handful that we really see that are going to work really well. We've experimented with some. We've had a lot of loss through trial and error, and we keep working on different growing practices to see how we can help the olives do a little bit better in this climate. So obviously olive trees are used to a Mediterranean climate, hot, dry, long growing season. They're pretty drought tolerant, and here, we're pretty wet and we have a shorter growing season. So we've started using a lot of the black plastimulch just to heat up the ground and reflect the heat in the summertime. They seem to really love that. That's working really well. We do use drip irrigation on the new trees, but once they're really well established, they are drought tolerant, so we don't really need to worry about that too much. And I think the biggest difference about growing olives here versus a warmer climate is that you don't see as much as far as yield. So we're getting a smaller yield of olives per acre and a smaller amount of oil per ton that you would, and that's okay. We're still producing a really exciting amount of olives the further along we get. So you're welcome to walk up to the trees. There are olives on these trees. Arbequina produces a smaller olive, and you can see too, these trees were planted in 2005. They are shorter because we prune. So these trees could definitely get up to 30 feet tall, but because we hand harvest everything, we like to keep them pruned low, so we're just walking through and not getting on ladders. And they're also planted close together, so this is a high density style of planting just to maximize the amount of fruit per acre. And let me see. The olives are really, for this variety, are pretty small. They all start out green, and you're welcome to walk into the grove too. They all start out green, and when we harvest, they're just starting to turn. So they're just starting to turn purple and blushing with those dark black colors, but still primarily they're green. And it's a great time for harvesting for olive oil because they have a higher amount of polyphenol, so the antioxidant content is higher, and then they produce, they're much more flavorful. So if you were going to leave these on, which I don't think we could here in this growing season until they were really black, you would get a much mellower oil. It wouldn't have as many antioxidants in it. So just a little bit different flavor profile. And harvest here is late October, early November, and that's actually pretty standard. For us, what we're really watching for, though, is the weather. So if we think we're going to have a frost, we need to pick everything before that frost because that'll damage the fruit and we wouldn't be able to use it. So we're just heading into harvest season, so we're just getting finished picking all the grapes. And in the next couple weeks, the crew's going to start coming out and getting ready to harvest our olives, so it's pretty exciting. And they'll come through and spend several days out here, and the way we harvest, we have buckets that are strapped over the shoulder, and everything is just stripped right off the branches. So they go through, strip off the branches, and we haven't started using any kind of mechanical picking devices. We have toyed with the thought of using shakers, but we're not quite there yet, so we'll see.
How long
And
does
17
it take to, how long does it take to harvest the whole 17 acres by hand?
Yeah, a couple weeks. But that's partially because we're stopping, so we pick one variety at a time, and then we'll mill that, and then we'll go pick at the other varieties and mill that variety. So everything that you'll taste, if you'd like to taste the oil, everything that we produce is a single varietal of olive oil, except for our Tuscan, which is a blend. And it's fun to taste that way because you're really tasting all those characteristics from that particular olive. So harvest, we go through and pick all those olives, and 17 acres is really small, so what we do is not 100% Oregon. A tree like this, in a really good fruiting year, might only give you about a 6 to 8 ounce cup of olive oil. So you can see it takes quite a bit of olives. In a really warm growing climate, the general calculation is 2 to 3 tons of olives per acre and 2 to 3 gallons of olive oil per ton. Here, we're not getting that much just because of our growing season, the climate. So we supplement with olives from Northern California, and that's an important thing too. When those olives are picked, you know, what the priority is once they're picked is to get them to the mill as fast as possible, because the whole idea is to maintain that high amount of antioxidants so you have a really good quality oil. So when those olives are picked in Northern California, we know when they're picked. Usually late evening or early in the morning when it's still cool outside. They're transported up here immediately, and we receive them and just start milling. And sometimes we're milling 24 hours just to keep those olives going through, keep those antioxidants, those high levels in there. The longer they sit, they start to compost. You can stick your hand down in one of those big totes and feel the olives heating up, and we don't want that. So. The first step after harvest is they do load them up in those big totes, just like you see wine grapes traveling in, and they bring them over here. And this is our mill. So these trucks come down, and we're just kind of cleaning up out here, so everything's a little disconnected and all over the place. But there's a large scale out here where we weigh the olives, just so we can kind of understand how much oil we're going to yield. And then the first part of all this equipment is kind of a whole washing and separating system. So those olives are poured into the hopper, and this separates out any leaves, twigs, or debris that have been part of the harvest. And then they come up this small elevator into the washer, and this is kind of a 2-part washing machine, if you will. The first part, it's all just water. There's everything we do here is extra virgin olive oil, so there's no chemicals or anything like that. So they are washed with water, and that just takes off any residual dirt, dust, bugs, things like that. And then the second part, they're sucked up this tube, and they come across the top where they're really shaken up quite a bit, and the whole top part kind of vibrates and water drips over the top, and that takes off a natural waxy layer that's on the olive, and that just helps when they're being milled to get that oil released a little faster than if that waxy layer was on there. Any questions so far?
I have a question going back to the trees
Sure.
and everything. Are they insect pollinated, bee pollinated?
Mostly wind. The bees definitely help, but the blossoms are so tiny. So they set, like 40 to 50 blossoms on just, a small area. And out of the majority of those, it's all wind. So in the spring, it's really ideal if the weather is just that temperate warm and you have a light breeze. And then we have different trees in different areas that work as cross-pollinators. So if you had all the same varieties planted, you wouldn't get usually as good of a yield than if you have a few different varieties planted. So, yeah. But the bees are out here; they do help. So, yeah. So from this section here, we have this large. Looks kind of like a giraffe if you look at it from the side. This is set up at the end, and you're all welcome to come in here so you can see the equipment. Those olives drop down in there. They go up the large neck, and this is where all the milling starts to begin. So all of this is an Italian mill. Was brought over from Italy, and this is actually the smallest commercial mill you can buy on the market. If you were going to go tour probably anywhere else but here, all these pieces of equipment would be 10 times bigger at least. And this is the first part of the milling equipment, and so this is a more modern way of milling. This is called an Italian hammer mill. And what you see out there earlier when we passed by that old Spanish mill, they still do have mills like that today that are in clean environment and mechanized, but that's becoming kind of an old, going by the wayside, and this is what a lot of people are using now. So the olives come into this first part of equipment, which is called the crusher. And in here, there's these, let's see if I can find one. Right inside here are these round steel plates and what look like hammers, hence the term hammer mill. The olives go in the top and then they tumble around inside, and these hammers literally beat them through these holes where they turn into particulate matter. And then all of those pieces go into these large vats. So there's one here and one on this side. And then there's large augers in here with big paddles, and then this mixes the paste. So it breaks into these particles, but essentially what you see in here is this large green paste. And this is probably one of the longer parts of the process, 45 minutes to an hour and a half. It just depends on how cold it is outside to get the oil to release, the variety of olive, the year, from year to year it changes too. And so let's see, there's a warm water jacket around the outside, and this gently warms that paste. And because it's extra virgin olive oil, you don't want that paste to be heated above 80 degrees. So that's what's considered a cold press. Once you heat it above that 80-degree temperature, you slowly start to kill off the antioxidants that are present. You don't want to do that. And this is also where the kind of the artistry comes into the milling. So each variety definitely has its own flavor characteristic. But the shorter you mill the paste, you get more of a fruitier flavor component. And then if you mill too long, the oil can become bitter. And so they really kind of play with those flavor profiles here. And then, like I said, I think 45 minutes to an hour and a half, you start to see those oils rise to the surface, so these big golden ribbons of oil, and the correct flavor, and then it's time to process through the rest of the equipment. And so all the paste goes out the bottom of this equipment there's a large paste pump over here. And I think if you want, you could all fill in. I think everybody will fit in here. I can even open that up. So the paste pump pumps it into this first centrifuge. This is a big horizontal high-speed centrifuge, and this separates the solids from the liquids. So the solids get pumped out. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Are you all right? I didn't see that one. I didn't either. Oh, there you go. No, that's another one. Let's turn that around. So the solids get pumped out, and we compost the solids. If you've ever tasted a fresh olive off a tree, it's terribly bitter. It's so bitter that the family raises livestock. The pigs won't even eat the paste. So So it's good for compost, and there's a lot of that. So we send it to a local facility that can take large amounts of that compost. And then the oil keeps flowing through. This is the oil filter water heater. The oil filter part just filters out any particulate matter that got through the centrifuge, and the water heater just keeps that flowing. Again, it's cold outside, that oil will start to thicken as it cools. And then it comes around the corner, and there's a final centrifuge. This is a really small vertical centrifuge, and this is where any water is separated out. So it's the final step. There's usually a large spigot on top of here, and right out that spigot comes the fresh olive oil. And if you're here, if anybody wants to travel down during that milling time, the millers are great, and they'll put out that fresh olive oil so you can taste it, whatever's come out fresh from the mill that day. And when it comes out, right here, it's classified as what's called olio nuovo, which means new oil in Italian. And the difference between that and what we normally get in the grocery store, or even in our store, is that it's completely unfiltered. There's a lot of sediment in there, it's cloudy, and the flavor is just really amazing and robust. So we do a special bottling of that, but you have to use it quickly. It just lasts 4 months because all that sediment will start to turn. With the rest of the oil, there's only one harvest a year, so it's really important to store it all properly. Right over here in the corner and behind this glass, we have these large stainless steel tanks. So the oil goes into these tanks. So air, light, heat, and time are the four big destroyers of the quality of your oil. The stainless steel definitely keeps out any light penetration. The rooms are kept at a certain temperature, so it's not getting too warm in here. And then they're capped with nitrogen, so you're not getting any oxidation occurring in there. So it keeps it as fresh as possible. And we let all that sediment from the olive oil kind of let gravity do its job. It's called racking. That sediment will eventually start going to the bottom of the tank. They'll take that sediment out, then they'll run it through a filtration system just to get the rest of it out and put everything in a new fresh tank. And this is how we store it, and we bottle on demand. So usually what you get off of our store shelves has been bottled within the last 2 weeks to 4 weeks, just depending on the demand for it. And that just ensures we haven't bottled everything all at once. It hasn't been sitting in grocery store shelves or in our store storage where it's been exposed to all the different fluctuations of heat, temperature, light, and all those things. So any questions so far? Yes?
Flavors. How do you get the flavors in?
So the lemon, blood orange, or basil here that you see in the store, those are from Northern California. We are going to try our hand, hopefully this winter, at doing the lemon. And those particular oils, some oils you can buy are infused, which means they've added flavoring. The oils we have in there are fused, which means they've actually, during this process, put all the fruit in the crusher with the olives, so it's all milled together and those oils are centrifuged out together, which gives it a really nice flavor. So we're going to try doing lemon oil this year, so we'll get some fresh lemons from California this winter. And
You just
try
use
them.
the whole lemon then?
Yeah, the whole lemon will go in, and so that those oils from the skin, and creates a really nice flavor. So.
When's the harvest? I'm gonna be here.
Yeah. So we think we'll definitely start milling by the end of October.
Okay.
And then into November, we do have a festival. It's the 17th through the 19th of November, and it's kind of the celebration of end of the season. So the whole property is open. There's lots of people here. If you don't like crowds, Friday morning is the best day to come. But we open the top of our mill, which is a big event space, and there's complimentary olive oil tasting of all that olio nuovo, and light appetizers and a small taste of a newly released wine, and it's all complimentary. It's just to invite people to come celebrate the harvest with us. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and tasting all of that fresh olive oil is just pretty amazing. So
I'm so here. I have to try it.
So what do you clean the equipment with?
They use a detergent, but we're really careful that there's no chemical residue left in here. We don't want any of that. The same too with our growing practices. I didn't mention, we don't spray our trees, so we don't use pesticides on the trees. And the fertilizers we use are natural fertilizers, so we're not, the only spray we do use on the trees so far is copper. And the trees sometimes get what's called peacock spot, which is like a little fungal spot you can see, and it's just from too much moisture. So the copper spray just helps with that. And then the trees are pretty pest resistant. I know in California they've had problems with the fruit boring fly. We haven't had that problem yet, so keep fingers crossed. But yeah, even the deer, I think everything's very bitter. So as far as birds and deer, there's not a big problem. Any more questions? Okay, great. We do have a small bottling area we could walk by. We bottle 4 bottles at a time. We're really small, so it's, it's very small, and everything is, capped and hand labeled. One thing that we're really excited to be doing in the last couple years is we have an etching machine which we've added, and that puts on the mill date and the bottle date. So when you look on your bottle, you know when everything's been milled, which is really important, and when it's been bottled. Just that way you can really know how fresh your oil is, which is really important. So, yeah.
So once open, how long would you recommend using it within a certain time period for you?
Once you've opened your bottle of oil, and this is any oil anywhere, we recommend using it within 6 to 9 months. So I know I had somebody say they had brought back this beautiful bottle of oil from Italy, and they had it for 3 years, and they just used drops of it at a time, and I went, oh no, it's probably rancid by now. So when you get your oil, use it up. You buy it in quantities. If you buy it at Costco and you can't use it up in 6 to 9 months, buy a smaller container. It just, within that period, it starts to lose all of the antioxidants. They start to break down. And if your bottle is unopened and you store it properly, so away from heat, light, and in a good, cool, dark place, it can definitely last for up to 18 months unopened before you open it. So, yeah. Well, we could go down and bitterness and pungency that should be present in your olive oil. So when you're tasting, there's little cups in there. You could just put a little oil in your cup, and if you put the cup in the palm of your hand, just kind of warm it ever so slightly, smell it, and it's really amazing the aroma that comes off of the olive oil. And then traditionally what you would do is sip it. It's almost like wine tasting, and kind of let that olive oil coat your palate. Use the bread for clearing your palate in between, and the reason for that is the bread takes, you're tasting more of the bread than you are the olive oil when you're dipping. And then you get all those flavor profiles. You can really taste the different characteristics between the oils. And that pungency, that last flavor profile is a peppery finish. And sometimes it makes you want to cough, so they say cough once, it's good, cough twice, it's great olive oil. Those are the health properties in the oil, those are the polyphenols, so you know that there's a higher level of polyphenols when you get that little peppery burn. Now, if swinging olive oil does not sound like your thing, please feel free to dip the bread and taste how you want, but just enjoy the rest of your time here. So, yeah.